we loaded the express library, we loaded the passport library, and also the local strategy, which is we're going to configure here in the local strategy function down here. That it's the communication. This allows us to interact with the passport framework and receive the username and password from the client from Angular, and then authenticate them against our local database. And the way that the client is going to interact with us is by posting to this URL. It's going to post to this URL a username and password, and we're going to have passport intercept that incoming post request, when it intercepts, it's going to use the function that we pass here as an argument. It's going to use that function to handle that interception, right? It's gonna parse from the post. It's going to parse out the username and password, and pass it to us in this function, in the function that we configured right here in the local strategy. Right? And this is how we told it. We told it use the local strategy. Here's local, and so it's going to use the function that we provide there. I was going to pass the username and password that it parses from that post, and then it's our responsibility to use the local database to authenticate this person, whether this person exists or not. That's why it's called the local strategy, right? And when we'll look at Google and Facebook later on, we're not going to go out to our database, right? Instead, we're going to redirect any incoming requests to log into Google or Facebook. We're going to redirect them to Google or Facebook, right? And to a URL that Google and Facebook will give us, right? Says use this URL, and then once when we redirect them to those pages, they will be challenged with a username and password page where they can enter their username and password for those authentication authorities, and then they'll redirect us back, providing us with a callback function saying, hey, here's the user and here's the result of their authentication, right? So we'll do that a little later. Right now, we're using the local strategy, so we're responsible for looking up these people in our database, right? When we'll use the Google and Facebook, it will be those third parties who are responsible for looking them up in their databases, right? And then notifying us whether it was successful or not. Okay, but here, since it's local, it's our responsibility to go against our database. Make sense? Okay. So here we're using the model we created earlier, right? Right here, the user model, where we had created these three APIs, right, that connected to Mongoose and looked up users either by credential or by ID. So we're going to use the use by credential. We're going to pass the username and password, and it's going to come back with either an actual user object, right? If we found it in the database, if we do find it, we're going to use this done function that is passed in to the local strategy. We're going to use that to notify the rest of the framework, the passport framework, that yes, indeed, this is a valid user, by calling the done function and not providing any error, and providing the user object instance, right? The rest of the framework is going to make a record, right? That yes, this is the current user, right? It's gonna mark them as authenticated. It's gonna store it in the session so it can remember next time around, right? And it's gonna add also this user object in the request, right? So that if anybody else in the chain, in the request chain, right, wants to look at this user, they can find the user in the request. Right? If the user does not exist, right, instead we use a done function to pass in a falsy, 0 or false or empty or null or undefined, to notify the framework that nope, this user is not a valid user, right? So what passport is going to do is that is going to abort the request, right? If anybody else was in the chain of requests, it's going to abort it and immediately respond back to the client saying nope, unauthorized. This is that username and password was no good. We can pass it an optional message or an error object, right, back to the user. Here we're deciding not to pass an error message. We just this is going to immediately abort the request. If we allow the request to go through, right, the done is going to allow the next request handler in the chain to continue. In this case, we had our own local function called login. This is which is going to handle the business part of this, right? This is the authentication layer, right? This is our authentication layer, which we're delegating it to a dedicated library that handles these things, right? Instead of doing it us from scratch, we're delegating all this to a very well popular library. Instead, here's the business layer. Once they're logged in, once they made it through the security layer, right? It notifies our login function, which what we're doing is just we're just notifying and says, oh yes, that worked. The user is logged in. It's successful, and we're deciding to just respond or echo back to the user, back to the client, right? Back to our Angular JavaScript client. We're echoing the user object back to the client. But we could do other things, right? We could maybe put them in a default role as a student or as a faculty. We could initialize their profile information, maybe some initial preferences we could do here, right? After they have authenticated themselves, right? We could do all sorts of things here, verify certain things. In the business part, we're deciding not to do. We just log them in, and we echo them back to the client side. Okay. Yes. So it doesn't. Well, it returns the local strategy. So basically, the way this works is that you get a chain of requests. So the request works as follows. So here's Node.js, right? Right, and here's the client, the browser, and the browser generates a request, right? HTTP : blah blah blah, all that, and it's intercepted by Node.js, and the Node.js allows you to chain together any number of request handlers, right? By using the method use, so app.use, right, and you provide a function, right, and all those functions are going to be looking at this request, right, and any one of them in the chain can abort the request, right? So this is you can create a chain, and what happens is that every single one of them has a request response. Anyone can respond immediately, or they can decide to let the request just keep going until anyone in the chain can abort the request and say, nope, that's it. I don't want the request to go any further, right? And this allows you to break up the handling of the request in multiple layers, right? For instance, we've decided to add a security layer, right, to handle all incoming requests, right, to go through first the security layer, right? If the security layer decides to let it through, then it'll go through. Otherwise, right, they can immediately abort and generate a response, right? And they generate a failed authentication error. And this allows you to do all sorts of things. For instance, you could do data mapping. You can do conversions of data models, where, for instance, the client might have a very flat data model, but your server might have a very hierarchical data model. Right? So you can do a lot of mapping between the two, and every one of them can just go next until somebody responds. Here, we're deciding that either the password is going to respond, or login eventually is going to generate the response here, right? Just sending back the JSON object. And the way it works is that it does it calls on the done. Every function allows you to provide here a third parameter called next, right? That allows you, well, you can call it, we called it here done, but you can call it next also. It's a very common name for these functions. It's a third parameter that allows you to create these chains, right? So you say next. As long as you call next, right, just anyone who's in the net, anyone who's in that chain will receive the request, and they can add things to request. They can remove things in the request. It's a way for these layers to talk to one another as each one is handling the request. Notice that as far as the browser is concerned, right, the request is still live, right? It's still spinning, right? The browser is still waiting, and we're just passing it through different functions, each one calling next, until somebody generates a response back. They all share a common object, which is the request object, and they can all write to the request or read from the request, right? And they can communicate using the request. In this case, what Passport does when we pass this user object in the done is that it creates an object request.user. Right? It creates an object request. It makes it equal to the user that you pass in right there. Right? That's how login has the user as part of the request. See that? This done, right? A local strategy puts the user into that into the request. Okay. You don't have to return. I'm returning because I don't want to continue, right? Anything happening after it, right? You just have to call done. Okay. Which one? If you want to send back an error message, an error object. You want to be specific. You want to say, your username didn't match or the password didn't match. You can be a little more specific. Yes. Yeah, it's using over here. You can put the chain. You can create the chain. No, wait, not there. Sorry, right here. This is these comma separated. You can create several functions that you can provide, and they're all going to be called in that order. Yeah. Here, the ones we've been using so far is this one, right? This one, right? Where we just have that one function receiving the request response, but you can create any number of functions, either as a comma separated, right? Or you can use app.use, right? And you can add any number of calls there. Okay. All right, so now from the client's point of view, when they receive the user object back from having been successfully authenticated, let's see what happens on the client side. On the client side, we had an index page where we just had the login. We had the login over here that had two input fields, and for username and password, the login button, right, that used a local controller that passed in the user object here, and then received the user either as a welcome or as an error message, right? So if we logged in as Alice, okay, we received the welcome object, right? If instead we just had gibberish and said login, instead we received an error message. Okay, so let's be a little more. Let's keep working on this example. Notice that what's coming back from the network. The first one was successful, right, giving us back the user object, whereas the second one was unauthorized, right? We got a 401, right? That was generated by Passport, right? Aborting the request, not letting it go through, right? Immediately responding with a 401, right? I didn't find that user. It's unauthorized, and we're handling it. We're handling at the client side here as an error, right? That's actually a legitimate error, right? It's a 401. And either welcoming the person or giving them an error. Make sense? Okay. So let's keep going with this example. Typically, we wouldn't have this login page, right? It would be only the first of several pages, right? Perhaps a login page, perhaps a profile page, a register page. So let's work on those additional use cases. Okay. All right, so to do that, we're going to have to refactor this a little bit and add multiple pages, right? We're going to have to be able to navigate between pages. So let's add routing. Let's add routing, and it's under Angular route. There it is. Also, let's we're going to move out this login page. We're going to put it in its own page, right? So that it will be injected in here, as many other pages will be injected into this one index page, right? So let's do that. Let's move this out into a login page. So let's grab this. Let's grab this login page. Let's remove it from here. Okay, and let's move it into views. We'll have the user views. We'll have under templates. Templates will have login page. We'll say login .view.html, and we'll just put in the login view here. Make sense? All right. Let's see. Also, we'll need to have a controller here. So controllers, and we'll need a login controller. We're going to move the controller, this login controller, we'll move it over there. All right, so let's copy this and let's paste it in here. It'll be the login controller. Right? Let's see. So it's passport.js, passport app. We're going to remove that, no dependencies, right? Because it's only declaring the controller. And instead in app.js, we're going to remove the controller from here, right? And instead, we're going to make ng-route as our dependency. Make sense? Right? And we're going to configure the function right here. Configure, and it's going to use route provider. Route provider, is it? Yeah, route provider. To declare the login page is the default page, right? So we'll say route provider when if you see login. Actually, login, and then we want to show the let's see, what do we show? We say the template URL is views user templates, and then login view.html. Okay, and for controller, it'll be the login controller, and referred to as the model from within the template. Correct? All right, and if you don't know where to go, then redirect to the login page, to the login. Yes, if you don't know where to go, that's where you should go. Make sense? All right. Let's see. What else do we need to do? We need to load. We need to declare this as our ng view. All right. This is our ng view, and we need to load that new controller we just created. So this will be under views, user controllers, login controller. What else? Let's see. Anything else? ng app. I think we have that, right? Yeah, we have that already. Lectures passport. And it worked the very first time. There we go. So we're basically we were 2 minutes ago, right? But with the idea that now we can add any number of other pages, right? Like a profile page, or like a register page. So let's so for instance, what should happen after we log in? Typically, you would go to the profile page, right? That would be the normal thing, or to some home page, or some your activity page or something, right? But let's go to the profile page, right? So let's create a placeholder for the profile page. So let's see. Let's create here profile view HTML, and for now this will just be h1 profile. Okay, right? So in our controller, we need to create a new route, right? Saying that if we're going to the profile page, then we are going to load the following template, right? So views, user, templates, templates, and then profile.view.html. All right. So if I refresh and I go to profile, all right. So we're navigating to a profile. So that's there. Very good. So from the login page, if it's successful, we're going to go to the profile page. If not, we're not going to go to the profile page. Make sense? Okay. So to do that, we can go to login controller, and we can add the location service so that if it's successful, we're not going to bother welcoming the person. We're not going to bother welcoming the person. Instead, we're going to just let them go to the profile page. Otherwise, they're going to be stuck in the login page. Make sense? So we're going to say location dot URL. We want to go to the profile page. Pre-field page, no, profile page, right? So again, if I don't log in correctly, it's just going to be stuck here. But if I use Bob and Bob, it lets me go to the profile page, right? But there's one flaw, right? If I refresh, and even though I'm not logged in, right, I can still type here profile, right, and go to the profile page, right? Now, who am I logged in as when I go to the profile page, right? So first of all, there's a couple things here that we need to take into account. First of all, we should not allow you to navigate to the profile page unless you successfully log in. That's one thing. And also, if I do log into the profile page, presumably I have gone through an authentication procedure, and I should display the information specific to the person who just logged in. Okay. Now, so somehow this profile page should know, oh, it's this person who's logged in, and should display the information about that one person. Now, the way we've been doing it so far, right, is that we've encoded that state, right, as an ID in the URL, right? In the assignment, right, we typically say, you know, /user/ and then the ID of the user, right? And then the controller uses that ID to go fetch the user and display that one user. Yes, right? But guess what? We're using the session now, right? The session is remembering things about us, right? Who is currently logged in. So we don't need to do that work on the client side, right? The server is already remembering who it is. Okay. So let's look at those two issues, right? So basically, what we want to be able to do is first protect that page. Okay, if you don't successfully log in, meaning I should not let you navigate to that profile, right? Just like I should not let you to navigate to an admin page, or, you know, same things that are sensitive, right? That should only certain folks should be allowed to use. Make sense? So let's do that. So the way we're going to achieve that is that we're going to configure here, right, alongside with this profile route. You're going to say, wait a minute, before I let you through, there are some issues you need to resolve first, right? Once you have resolved these issues, then I will let you go through. Make sense? So the way we do that, the way we configure this is that there is a resolve configuration, right? And that resolve configuration allows us to configure different things that need to be successful before I let this route go through. Make sense? And with the way we configure it is that we give it a name, right? Some name, which I'll talk in a second, and then a function. Okay, a function. For instance, we would like to. One of the things we need to resolve is to make sure that the person is indeed logged in. right? So maybe we could call it check login or something like that. So this could be like check login. And that would be a function that would be configured elsewhere. So we can configure maybe right here. We can say function check login. Check login. Okay. So login can now check login can, for instance, validate whether this person is logged. And who knows who's logged in? The only one that holds the truth on whether somebody's logged in is the server. The server is the only one who really knows whether this person has already authenticated. There's a ValidSession, right, on the server side, right? It has a database, it has everything active, so only the server could tell us whether this person is actually logged in, right? We can never trust the client, right? Because the client could always be thwarted by, some clever JavaScript, expert, right? Trying to mess around with cookies and mess around with the local session on the client side, right? But the server is protected from those kinds of things, so we always should ever go back to the server to validate these things, right? So one of the things that we should do is perhaps use the user service, right? The user service that we had created earlier. Where is it? In lectures, right? We had created. Oh, we didn't create a user service, did we? So how did we do how does the controller? What's the controller doing? Oh yeah, no, the controller. Okay, the controller is using HTTP, right? Yeah, we were doing some shortcuts last week, right? Really, this should be wrapped inside of a service, right? So let's do that first, right? Let's make that a refactoring. Let's see. Let's create a little service here. So we'll say services. Let's create a user service. So user dot service dot client.js. And in here, let's do an iffy. And here we'll say Angular dot module. And what's the name? Was it passport app, I think? And we'll declare a service called user service implemented in the following function. Which it's going to use HTTP, right? And so we can now move this post. We can move it from here. We can move it here, and we'll call this a login in a function login. I can't type today. Function login. And here's the code that we're moving from that controller, right? So you should never do that from the controller. Let's see. This takes as argument a user object. Looks like that's what it's expecting. A user object that I presume contains the username and password in there. And here, notice that this is user interface stuff, right? Navigation services should not be responsible for navigation, right? That's the controller's responsibility, not the service. So let's take that out of here. We'll return here in the function. We're just going to let's see, unwrap the response, right? We'll say return response.data. So from the controller's point of view. Instead we're going to use the user service instead, right? So user service, and so instead of using this, right, we would use user service dot login and pass the user there, right? This would respond with a callback with the user object right here, okay? And that user object. We can determine on whether we're going to continue or not, right? So we can say here, if user, then we're going to do the location, right? We're gonna go to the profile, right? We're gonna go ahead with the profile. If there's an error right here, function error. We're going to handle it by using model error right there. Okay, so we don't use this anymore. Let's see, function error. We're also going to pass in the, let's see, return, response, error. Well, let's see how this works. Let's refresh. What did I forget? Oh, thank you. Okay. Also, we need to declare, we need to load this in the index page, right? So we'll load that as a service right here. So it'll be script, source, services, user service. There it is. Okay. Let's reload. Okay, so let's try this out. Okay, so that still works. And if I go at, Bob and Bob, login still works. Okay, very good. So we got that service now. We're using the service instead of in the controller. Okay, so we can go back to the controller and safely remove this. Well, let me try that again. I'm refreshing. Make sure that I have the latest code. Okay, all right. All right, so we can remove this out of here. Very good. All right, so let's go back to protecting that profile page. Okay. Yes. Oh, right. So, so remember that there are really two ways that we can create services, and they're pretty much equivalent, right? In this way, right, of using .service, you can either use .service or .factory, right? If you use .service, this function is treated as a constructor, right? And the .service function calls new on this function. Right, so what you get back is that instance object, right? And then it makes that instance object tied available through the rest of the framework by anybody who uses this name as an injection will get the instance, right, of that object, right? The other way to do it is to use factory. And so the equivalent to this, would be factory. So let's declare a second one. Okay. Would be to have, I'll implement it right down here. It would be function user service. And so instead, this is not going to be treated as a constructor, right? Instead, anything that whatever this function returns, right? Whatever it returns, that object that this function returns, that's what's going to be bound to the name. Okay, so in this case, we would create an object, API, okay, and would return that object. In that object, we would create functions such as login, right, and implement them locally. Right, so the implementation would be exactly the same, right, but instead of this would not be treated as a constructor. Oh wait, so service 2, right? This would not be treated as a constructor, right? Whatever this function returns, that object is what is bound to this name, right? You get the same. You get the same exact functionality, right? I've seen them used equally the same on both. There's a service crowd. And there's a factory crowd that like them. The name factory, the reason that it's called factory, it comes from a design pattern called the factory pattern, right? Where typically when you create something in any object-oriented language, and for instance, if you want to create a new date, you say new and then the object, right? The class name. That's the typical things how you create instances of things in object orientation, right? A factory pattern is you would use a factory pattern when instantiating an object. It's a fairly complex thing, right? It's not enough to just call new and then the class that you want to instantiate. Perhaps you need to make a database connection. You need to go out to a server. You need to read some files, right? So it's a fairly complex thing to instantiate an object, right? So a new constructor. Perhaps you can't encapsulate all the logic that would go into instantiating a new object, right? typically you would encapsulate it inside a constructor like this. You would instantiate it inside of a date constructor. But if it's fairly complex, and the arguments would be a fairly long list of arguments that you would need to pass. Maybe those arguments are dependent on each other, right? So what you do is you delegate that complexity of creating something, right? You delegate it to a function that would do all these things, go out to the network, do these things, that, and the other, and then it would return, right, some instance, right, that would represent that object that you just instantiated. We're doing that. We're instantiating this object, right? We're creating it piece by piece, right? These functions, those functions, this data, encapsulating it into a larger object. This is a very trivial API, but you can, we've created some more ones that had CRUD operations, right? So you would encapsulate all those behaviors into one object, and then you return that object as the instantiated new object. Make sense? Okay. All right. Right. So you can use one or the other. You would get exactly the same behavior. All right. Okay. Right. So this is using the constructor syntax, right? Using binding the some function to the current instance that is being instantiated. Basically, this is a pointer or reference to the current instance that is being instantiated. All right? Okay. That answer? Okay. Okay. So right. So what we want to do is we want to protect that this route, right? We don't want to navigate to the profile page unless someone is actually logged in. And the only place that we can check to see if this person's logged in is to go out to the server. It says, "Hey server, has anybody recently logged in?" And the server says, is going to look up. The server's going to respond, "Oh, wait a minute, let me go look in the session." Right? "Oh, yes, I have someone in the session who just recently logged in." Right? They haven't timed out yet, so it's a valid session still. Right? So within the last 30 minutes, yes, somebody has just logged in, and I'll pass you the user object, and then you can say, "Yes, somebody has logged in. Let them through to the profile page." Make sense? All right. So the check login is going to use the user service, which we just created, right? And what we want to be able to do here is we want to go out to the user service and ask it, is someone logged in, right? And this would respond with either a user object or not. Okay. So what this is going to do is that it's going to call the function check login. Okay. We're going to go out to the server. That this is going to be an asynchronous call to the server, right? The server is going to respond to us, and we're going to have to then let someone who's waiting, right? Somebody's waiting on this, right? Waiting. Yes, are they logged in or what? Are they? It's kind of waiting on this, and let them know whether it's successful or not. So to be able to, since it's asynchronous, these are all waiting on promises, right? This is going to be an asynchronous. You can make a lot of things. You can put a lot of things that you need to resolve. For instance, are they logged in? Are they admin? Right? Are they in the correct role? Are they authorized? You can do a lot of things that you want to check first before you let them in through a particular route. Okay? All these things would be checked with the server, and all of them would have to come back successful, right? To be able to continue and let you through a particular route. Right now, we're only checking whether you're logged in. Okay? So we need to, and all of these are going to be asynchronous calls. So somehow we need to be able to synchronize all those asynchronous calls, right? They're going to go out all independently with different threads, right? They're all going to come back in different orders, right? We need to synchronize. And the way we synchronize that is with the queue library, right? The queue library that we use on the server. Well, there is a queue library also on the client side, right? So on the client side, we get an instance of the queue library by using $q, and it uses exactly the same API that we've become familiar on the server side. So what we're going to do exactly the same thing that we used on the server. we're going to create a defer object, and immediately we're going to return that deferred promise, right? So that means that this guy over here, right, the resolve, right, Angular is waiting on us. It says, I'm waiting for this thing to be for it to be resolved, right? So at some point, if the user is a valid object, then we are going to defer.resolve, right? Resolve, and I'm going to pass you the user object. Everybody okay? All right. So let's try this out. Well, we have to implement the logged in, right? We haven't done that. So let's implement that in the service. We're going to add that here. So this dot logged in is going to go out to the server, logged in, and it's going to do the same thing, a post, and it's going to be logged in, right? We don't pass any arguments, and it's going to come back successful or not successful, right? So let's implement that on the server side. Well, let's see actually if this works, right? So let's go back, let's refresh, and let's try going to the profile page. Notice that it didn't navigate to the profile page like it used to. See that? It never navigated to the profile. Instead, right? Notice that it went out to the server. So it generated that post, right? It's going out to the server saying, "Hey, is this person logged in?" But the server is not ready, right? We haven't implemented logged in functionality on the server side. But what I want to point out is that it did not let us through to the profile page, right? It's currently protected, right? We never were able to resolve the promise. Okay, we weren't able to resolve the promise. All right, so let's implement this. Let's go back to the server side, right? And let's implement the post logged in, right? We're not going to protect it with passport. That meaning anybody should be able to check whether you're logged in, right? I should be so it's not going to be it's not going to be intervened by passport. Anybody can come in and check to see if there is a valid session. Is there someone logged in, right? And if there is, right, passport will have the user in the request, right? Because in the session, it's inside of the session. So let's implement logged in. Right, so logged in right here, we're going to say function logged in, same request and response. It's going to check to see if there's a user right here, right? So over here, we're going to say we can respond. Right now, we're going to send back a 0 or false, something not valid. Okay, let's restart the server. Okay, notice that it came back. Logged in responded with a 0, right? Because that's what we're sending back to the server, right? So we should check to see what the server is responding, right? For instance, if we go and see in the check logged in source, and we load app, and we put right here what comes back, right? This deferred. Let's try it again. Notice that the user comes back as 0, right? Or it could come back as a valid user object, right? We can look up whether there's a user object or 0, and then we can put some logic here to say if the user is falsing, right, something that is null or 0 or false or undefined or empty object, right? We could just kick them back to the login page. Says, no, we're not going to let you through. Okay. So for instance, we could say here in the check logged in, right, in app, we could say, right, if a user, right, is equal to 0, right, we could say defer.reject, reject, not abort, reject, error, just reject, and then meaning don't let them through, right? And by the way, I'm going to force you to go back to the login page. So else, I'm going to assume that it was valid, right? And I'm going to let you through. Okay. Notice I'm going to resolve, but I don't know where this goes, right? It's not my responsibility to know where it goes. Where does it go? It goes to where you wanted to go in the first place, in profile, right? That's handled by the route, right? So let's try this again. So let's refresh. Right? Notice that it's 0. It's going to reject it, reject promise, and oops, defer. Let me spell it. Defer. Oh, it's deferred. Sorry, deferred. Let's try it again. There we go. It's going to go into deferred, and the next thing is going to kick us back into the login page. Right? So if I know that there's a protected page and somehow I saw somebody's URL, right, and want to try to thwart this, I can go to and try to kick it in. Notice that it won't let me through now. Profile. Right, always kicks me back to a login page because there's no valid user session. Right, every time I log in, every time I restart the server, right, that session is destroyed. Right, so if I say Bob, and I go log in, now it doesn't work. Wait, what? Oh, right. In the login, we're always returning 0. Right, we're always returning 0. So in the on the server side, we can check to see if there is a user, or there is already some API that checks to see if the user has already been authenticated. Let's see, logged in. Is authenticated right here. Is authenticated. We can use that as there's an API that already checks to see is a valid session already implemented. Yes, it's authenticated right here. Right, so we can use this right here. And what this says is that this is a function. This is a function that is added by Passport, right? That already checks to see if there's a valid session, right? If there is, this returns true, right? If there is no valid session, it returns false, right? So it's a syntactic sugar function. So if this is true, we're going to send back the actual user. We're going to send them back, right? The actual object in the request. Otherwise, we're going to send back a 0. Right, so let's do that. Let's restart the server. Restart the server. Let's try logging in. So we say Bob. We say login, and it lets us go to the profile page. Right. Now, if I go back and I try to go to a login page, notice that it lets me go to the login page. See that? Because the session is returning saying that yes, this is a valid user. To test this about timeout, I would need to wait like about 30 minutes. And then it would time out. Or if I restart the server, the session is cleared out. If I try to log into, if I refresh now, notice that it kicks me back to a login page, right? Because there's no valid session anymore. Make sense? All right. All right. So the next thing is that once we do log in, I would like to be able to at some point log out, right? If I can either time out, right, after 30 minutes, although you can configure it to be smaller time, right, or a longer time. I like to be able to log out, right? So let's do that. Oh, before we do log out, I did mention that when we protect it, notice that there's some name here. See this? Some name, right? So this information that you resolve, right, whatever you do resolve, right, is tied to this variable here that you give it a name, right? So for instance, one of the things that we'd like to be able to do is if you are successfully logged in, right, I will pass you data that is useful to you. In our case, if you do log in, one of the things that you might want to know is the current user, that just logged in. Right? I can just pass it to you. And one way that these could communicate is by resolving, and whatever is resolved is tied to that variable name. Okay, it's tied to. Let's see. I forget what the API is for resolve. So this is Angular JS route resolve. Let's see. Route provider find resolve object resolve as on the resolve. Okay, there it is. Yeah. So when you create a resolve and you give it the name, right? The whatever you do resolve, the object that gets resolved is available in the for each access the resolve dependencies from the template resolve map will be available in the scope of the route under the resolve by default, or a custom name specified by the resolve as by default, or a custom name. Do they have an example here? Otherwise, params. All right, so let's try it out. So some name. So oh, we don't have a controller, right? We need a controller. That's where you would receive the data, right? So let's create a controller for this, for the profile, so that we can receive the currently logged in user. So let's create a controller for this. Controller. This would be the profile controller, and the controller as would be model. All right, so let's create a very quick profile controller. So this will be this would be profile. There it is, and we'll call it profile controller. Profile controller, and profile controller. So for now, let's see. Let's only receive. I think you could give it a name of what you want to resolve it as. Resolve, so some name. Let's see if we could get here resolve, and let's see if we can do a console log resolve. All right, so let's load this this new controller as right here as a script. So src, that's views, user, controllers, and then this is the profile controller. All right. Okay, so let's log in. Console profile controller, yada yada yada. It's not resolve. Resolve. Yeah, no, it's okay. I guess it's not resolve provider. Where does it tie this to? Resolve. Route params, ng factory. Route params, be aware that ng route will refer to a previous route within factory. The sprint is the alias. Is it in route params? Is it in the route params? Let's see. Route params. No, it's not in there. Resolve. Just a second. Resolve. Example. Q when resolve yada 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 message function controller scope message news controller scope in the scope? No, not scope. Resolve is a property of the. Could it be just some name? It is. Okay. Yeah, so the name that you give it there, the name that you give it in the resolve, right, it gets passed to you. So whatever you resolve right here, right, in the app, when it's tied, right, it's tied to the object that you call here, right there. See, so if you call this current user, right, then you can then receive the current user right there, current user. There it is, right? So that in your profile templates, you could display the current user. You say model dot current user. I'm sorry? Yeah, in a second. Let me see. Model dot current user equal current user. Model this model, var model this, and then current user. So it's model. Did I do a controller as? I did. Profile control model. What did I do? In the view? Current. Oh, thank you. There it is. So yeah. So going back, notice that now I have access to the current user who just logged in, right? So the way it works is that so if I try to navigate to profile, right? It's going to first try to resolve any issues, right, by calling these functions, right? Whatever and you can list several functions. You can check admin, whether they're currently logged in, whatnot, right? So the function gets called. We're going out to the server to see if this user is currently logged in, and this comes back as either 0 or an actual user. If it's a user, we resolve, right? And whatever the object we resolve, right, that we pass to the resolve function, gets tied to the name of the resolve. Right? This is a map, right? This is a name value pair. So whatever this resolve as gets tied to this object right here, right? And it's available as an injectable object, right? Anybody who a controller can ask for it by name right here. So this name and this name would match, right? So whatever you call this, you can ask it by name here, and it's injected for you as a dependency that can be injected when it gets resolved. Make sense? Right. So if this resolves, the controller gets instantiated, right? And all the resolves, right? If you have a whole bunch of them, can be asked for by the controller by name, right? The name of the resolve, right? Can ask for it by name, right? Otherwise, we would have to do what? Somehow we would need to, pass somehow the ID of the user, right? The controller would have to go back to the server for the ID of this user, right? Retrieve the user by ID. It would be cumbersome, right? I already have that information, right? And it's passed to me as a resolve. Make sense? All right. Okay. All right, so we're logged in. We have the current user. We're displaying that user in the profile page. The next thing that we'd like to be able to do is log out, right? Yes? No, I'm still there. Yeah, you could make that logic, right? You could protect the login page, I guess, so that you can't go to a login page if you're already authenticated. I guess you could do that. You could put a resolve there, right? The resolve would go to check-in, right? If you're already logged in, it will not let you go to a login page. You could do that, yeah. Yep. Yep. So it goes to So it goes to the login page, right? Well, no, that only happens when I click on the login button, right? So it would need human interaction, right? A human action to actually go out to check, right? Right? /login. Right. Right. So it would go out to the server, right? And the server would say, no, there's nobody logged in. So it would let you go through. So you would resolve if it's 0, right? It would be the opposite logic from protecting profile, right? It would resolve if it's 0, and it would reject if there's somebody logged in. It would be the same, but it would be the opposite logic. And once you're in the login page, right, the only way to go forward is to actually log in. So no loop. Right? Yes. So it's based on the cookie, right? So the only way that the server actually maintains session is against the cookie. So the cookie would have to be on the. So for instance, if it's in the same tab, right? It would use the same cookie, right? But if I go in a protected one, incognito, it would not have the cookie, right? Since it doesn't have the cookie, the server has no way of knowing that if it's the same machine, right? It only by cookies. I'm sorry. The cookie is protected, right? Using that secret, right? So it would do it would do hashing, right, to make sure that it's the same cookie that it generated, right, from that secret. If you know the secret, you could generate an equal cookie, right? That you could steal somebody's session like that, right? That's why you would protect that secret and would put it in an environment variable as opposed to like I have it in clear text, right? Yes. Right. If I log in now as Alice, right, the cookie would change, right, to represent Alice. The cookie can only represent one user at a time in the same browser. I could log in from an incognito as one and another one as somebody else, right? And it would and the server would distinguish them as two completely different users, right? Each one with its own cookie. Yeah. Awesome. So all right, so let's do a log out, right? Let's add a button here for logging out. Let's, for instance, in the over here, let's add a logout button. So this would be a button, class, button, primary, and we're going to pull it to the right, and this is going to say logout. Okay, so it's way on the other side, right? And if we do click on this, we're going to say model dot logout. Log out. Right? So we're going to, on the controller, we're going to listen for this incoming event handler. We say model dot logout log out is equal to the logout function here. So we'll say function logout. And so what we're going to do is that we're going to go out to the server and say, hey server, you know that cookie that you have there, that session, just forget about it, right? Just invalidate that cookie, invalidate the session. There is no current. Now there's other folks who could be logged in, right? So it will be invalidate only this cookie, only this session, right? Remember, every logged in user will have its own session, right? Its own separate session. So what we're going to do is that we're going to go out to the server and say user service log out. So we need the user service right here, right? So there's the user service. And once we are successfully logged out, then we're going to, presumably we're going to go and navigate to back to the login page. I was going to say location dot URL back to the login page. Right, so we'll need the location here. Okay. So let's create the logout for the user service. on the client side. So on the client side, let's see, right here, right, we're going to add an additional service here. So let's be this dot logout, implement it right here. So this would be function logout. And we're going to go out to the server. We're going to post a logout. So post logout, logout. And just respond with whatever the server responds, right? So if we refresh this and look at the, and we inspect, and we look at the network, and if I click on logout, it went out to the server, right? So that we did notify the server, but the server is not yet ready to handle this request. So let's implement that on the server side. So on the server side, right? Let's receive the logout request. So log out. Okay. And what we're going to do here is we're going to handle this in a function, and we're going to invalidate the session. Right, so we're going to say function logout request response, right? And the way we're going to, yes. That's in the session, right? The cookie is always used. All these requests, right? The logged in, the logout are always in the context of the current session, right? So if I log out or somebody else logs out, request that user will be different. The request user will be different, meaning the cookie will be different. And so when you log out, you're going to invalidate the cookie with which you came here, right? So that cookie will be invalidated. So next time around you come with the same cookie, I won't know who you are. Right? But somebody else who has not yet invalidated, I will know who they are because they're still in the valid session. Right? Each body has their own cookies. Yep, their own cookie. Yep. So to do this, again, Passport provides as part of the API, right? Adds the current user to the request, adds the is authenticated, also part of the request. So that's all Passport APIs, right? What we're going to do is we're going to use the request, and we're going to call logout on that. Right? So this is a function again that Passport adds, right? That's Passport API, which is going to invalidate the session, so that the cookie still exists on the client, right? The browser still has it in its own cache, right? But if the browser tries to go to the profile page with that same cookie, right? The server is going to look it up and says, I don't know that cookie anymore, right? It's invalidated, right? So that's don't try to use the same cookie that I know that no longer is good. When we now that we have invalidated, we've logged out. We're going to respond, sending back a 200, saying yes, we're okay. But on the client side, we're going to navigate to a login page, and we won't be able to log in again. Go to the profile with that same cookie, that same session. So let's restart the server. So let's refresh. Notice that it kicked me out because the session was invalid, right? Whatever cookie I had was no longer valid, right? Because I restarted the server. The server has no memory of me anymore, okay? That might be a problem, right? What happens if the server crashes and I'm in the middle of of ordering something, right? So Node.js and servers in general allow you to keep sessions not only in RAM, because notice that right now sessions are being stored in the RAM of the server. But what if that server goes down, right? In the middle of a legitimate logged in session. So servers typically allow you to configure sessions to be cached on a file system, right? Or even a database, right? So that even if a server goes down, right, the session's still valid at a file system. And you can have servers configured so that you can have them in tandem, right? Where you can have another server on standby running, right? So that if one goes down, the other one can pick up, right, immediately and read the session from the file system, right? So that it can, if you were talking to one server and that went down, the other one can pick up and just keep conversing with whoever was in the session you're ordering or whatever was in the middle of a long running transaction, right? So that the user doesn't even know that the server went down, right? So anyway, we're not going to get into that. So let's see. Let's log in as Bob and Bob. We log in. If I refresh, I'm fine, right? This is going out to the server every time, checking to see if the person's logged in, right? If I log out, it gets invalidated and it kicks me back to the profile page. If I try to go to profile page again, notice that it doesn't let me go through, right? Because that session has been invalidated, right? Make sense? Yes. Yes, right, exactly. On the server side, all these functions are all responding to incoming HTTP requests. Yeah, so that's a function that's added by the Passport. So Passport, as part of its API, right? It adds the user to the request, the currently logged in user. It adds is authenticated, right? That's a very quick check to see if if the user currently logged in user has logged in, and also logout, right? It also has another function we'll see in a minute. It's called login. If you want to programmatically log in someone, for instance, when they're registering, if you register, right? I just registered, and the typical use case would be, since I just registered, typically I also am considered to be logged in, right? So I'm not going through the lookup, right? I'm not going through the lookup because I don't exist. There's nothing to look me up, right? I'm registering, and now because you've registered, you've given a username and password and email, blah, 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 right? I consider you a valid user now, so I'm going to log you in, okay? And we'll do that next. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, no, no, you need to have resolve on every single route that you need to protect. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry? Where on the server side? Yeah, right here. In the logout here. Right here. On the client side. Okay. Oh yeah. So this returns the promise. Right. This returns the promise. And this unwraps the data that's going to be what the resolve receives. Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. No. What Q has done is it's a kind of standardized the way the API works, right? So you'll see this then two functions and whatnot used not only on the server side but on the client side, just the same. Right? So they're trying to make it so that it's consistent across the various layers of the platform. Okay. Okay. All right. So we're protecting now the profile page. We're protecting. We were able to log out. Let's now work on being able to register. Right. If you're a brand new user, I would like to log you in. Okay. So let's do that. Let's add to the login view. Let's add another button here that would allow me to register. So let's say href. I would like to go to register. Okay. So this will be register, and and this will be class class button success and button block. Right. So if I log in, right, I'll have a new register button that will take me to the register page, right, which is going to look very, very similar to the login page. So I'm going to copy it and I'm going to call it register. Okay, and that register is going to have same thing, username and password, and presumably a second password, password number 2, which we could on the client side validate whether they're valid or not. Right? If they're not valid, we can let them know that the passwords need to match and whatnot. Right? If they click on register, here's the register. Right? We're going to pass it to a local controller register, or maybe we can cancel. We don't want to register now, and we can go back to the login page. Okay. Let's see. Register. Okay. Login. Cancel. All right. Let's see. If we go register. Okay. That's we have to configure the navigation, right? So if we click on register. We click on register, then we're going to go to the register view, which we just created. No controls just yet. So that if I click on register, here this should say register. There we go. So we have register where we can type in the username and the password twice. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's create a controller for that register, right? Which is going to take the username and password and send it over to the server for registering purposes, right? So let's do that. Let's create a register controller, and we'll call it register. Register, there it is, and we're gonna decorate it with register. There it is. Register, there it is. Okay. It's going to use the user service. And if we click on the register button, this function is going to be called, right? And presumably the service will have a register function, which we're going to pass. Okay. And it's going to come back. The registration is going to come back from the server either as successful or not. Whether you were successfully registered or you were not successfully registered. If you were successfully registered, we're gonna navigate to the profile page. Hopefully by then you will have been logged in, because if not, this is gonna fail. Right? Navigating to the profile page will fail. If you're not logged in, this will be intercepted by our resolve. Right? This is gonna go out to the server to check to see if you indeed are logged in, right? Okay, so let's write this register. Let's add it to the service. So the service is going to have a brand new API here called register, which is going to be implemented here with register. It's going to take the user object, which presumably has a username and password information. And it's going to do a post. So return HTTP post, and say API lecture morning, and then this will be register, and we're going to post the user object. Okay. This is going to come back with the response. We're going to unwrap that response. Right. Okay, so if we try this and we type something and we register, nothing works. Wait, what? Oh, we never loaded the controller. Right, we never loaded the controller. Right, let's load the controller. We'll need to say that our register page is tied to the register controller. Right, register controller. Right, register controller. And we need to load it in our index page. So let's do that. So we'll say script, source, views, user, controllers, register controller. There it is. All right, let's try this again. Register. Okay, so it went out to the server, right? It went out to the server and it posted the information for the username and password. But the server, again, doesn't know what to do with requests, so we'll need to create a handler on the server side. So let's go on the server side. So on the server side, let's create an event handler for that register and handle it in the register function. Which is going to be right here. So function register, and the user is going to be in the body, right? So var the user is going to be in the request.body, right? Notice that there's no one logged in just yet, presumably, right? So we have the user object. We need to create and insert this object into the database, right? One of the things you might want to do first is to check whether the username is already existent, right? If it is existent, then we might come back with an error message saying, sorry, we're not going to let you log in. Register because that username is taken. Let's skip that. Instead, let's assume this user doesn't exist and let's insert it into the database and then log that person in. All right. So let's do that. We'll use the model. So the user model. We're going to create the user. Create user. I think we already have a function that does that. Creates the user. And we'll pass the user object there, and it's going to come back, presumably with the actual user that has been inserted in the database. Yes? What we're going to do is that we're going to use the request login function. Right? The request login function. Again, login is a function that is added by the Passport API, right? To very easily just add this person as the current user. Let me just check that I'm using the correct API. Register. Do I have register here? I don't have register. Grr. I think it's just login. User, create user. Yeah, I think it's just login, and then login user. And then we're just going to respond. Send back send back JSON user. Let me make sure. Let's see. This is a get. App services user service request user. Oh, okay. Yeah. If user login user password. Okay. Okay, so this login function is actually a asynchronous, right? So this is going to be, it's going to come back with a, if there's an error. If there's no error, right? If there's an error, we can send back response.send 400 if there's an error. Otherwise, we can just respond with the actual user. All right, so let's restart the server and let's try this out. I'm going to go refresh this and let's try EWQ, EWQ, EWQ. Let's register, and we've logged in as EWQ, right? Right, I can refresh, and presumably that has been inserted into our database. There's EWQ, right, the username and password that was created and inserted into the database. Same thing, I can log out, right, and I can log in as EWQ, right, and it's just back to where we started from. Make sense? Right? All right, so there you go. We were able to protect pages, right, using the resolve functionality in the routing provider. we were able to also tie the user objects that were authenticated to the result object that can be passed down to the controller, right? Also, we added functionality to be able to log out, right? That invalidated a session previously created, and also we added the functionality of being able to register, and then once you register, log in that person and make them a valid current user in the profile, right? What I would like to do next when we come back on Friday is introduce using third-party authentication authorities such as Google, Twitter, Facebook. To do that, you need to register the application with those services, saying, "Hey, I'm creating these applications." Right? They'll give you keys, they'll give you secrets, and all sorts of things that you're going to store in process environment variables. Right? You can load them from there, right? And so that you can say, "Hey, it's the application, web app, right? That we're working on, right? And this is my secret, this is my key, and I want to authenticate myself. Here's a user that wants to authenticate with you, right? Presumably they have an account there. That's why they're trying to authenticate with Google. And so let me know, is this a valid user, right? Just let me know if they successfully authenticate. So we'll do that when we come back on Friday. All right. All right. Thank you.